Hey y'all, Alan here from Perk Coffee, and today we are going to replace the burr on my Encore grinder. We're going to upgrade it to the Virtuoso burr, and because mine is pretty old, I've also gotten a replacement drive shaft for it, and this is the Virtuoso style drive shaft, so it doesn't have the little wing nut on the top. It's just a little bit of a nicer burr that should grind more consistently. But also my burr is really old and tired. So this is gonna be a great little upgrade for it when I need to replace it anyway. So I've done some videos before on the Encore, so I'll go a little quickly through the first part of the disassembly. But you're gonna need your grinder itself, obviously. You can either use a drill with a little small hex screwdriver or a cross tip screwdriver. A small screwdriver set, will do you well instead. You need a flat tip screwdriver to help with the disassembly. 13 millimeter wrench is going to be the hot ticket for you, but yeah, a crescent wrench will kind of help you in a pinch. And then you want to do some cleaning while you're at it. So this has been at a buddy's house and hasn't gotten all the love that it needed. So I'll use this, and part of the reason I'm outside is compressed air goes a really long way towards cleaning out a grinder. So starting, you want to take the top off, so you immediately get rid of the hopper cover. You're going to want to rotate the hopper all the way over, take that out. Take out the little grommet that kind of feeds into the upper burr, and so you can see all the gunk that builds up on that over time. So we'll clean this out as we go. Gonna take out the on-off switch, and that's it for getting ready to remove it, other than the bin itself. Flat tip screwdriver just down under the case. There's spots on both sides that you're going to want to use the flat tip on, and you can just separate the upper part of the case from the lower part. It can be a little bit stubborn sometimes. You got to make sure you get all the spots on both sides. And you just lift straight up. So really dirty down in there, but we will address that separately. So next up, we want to pull the whole assembly up and out. So you've got this little, it's really a sensor to know when to not run the motor, essentially. So just pull that straight up and over, and then you've got 3 cross tip screws, and you can do those manually or disassembly in particular. There's nothing wrong with using a screwdriver. You do have 3 little nuts on the bottom of these, and if they are in a spot where they're going to spin, so sometimes this one does, you should be able to just stick your thumb on it and pull it out. And if it's being stubborn, you can't get it that way, you can always stick a little one of the little wrenches down in here. So I like to use a little parts bin to keep track of these. If I can get the screws to stay in where they did, that's what I'll do. This front one in particular, it's nice to have kind of a long, narrow screwdriver to be able to get to it. So this whole thing lifts straight up and out. Now, there is a little bit of a difference here. I'm going to pull out this rear mount with the screw still in it. There's a little bit of a difference here between, mine is an older model Encore and some of the newer ones. But with these, it's easy enough. Just pull the the clip out if you need to. I'm honestly not concerned about it. I'm gonna leave it installed, the motor to the clips. I don't need to do anything with the motor itself. So I'll just set the whole thing down on the top of it and just kind of keep it close enough. So you've got the screws there for that. Yeah, you've got small, 4 small screws that are going to hold the gearbox onto the motor. You can just remove those. If you're having trouble getting the drill down in there, that's why it's always nice to have the small screwdrivers available as well. There we go. And this whole thing will just lift straight up and out. All right, now I'm gonna just kind of set the motor back over here and set the whole bottom assembly of this aside for now. So now we're down to the gearbox and the burr. So if this little grommet comes off, it's okay. You can just stick it back on. So this should be a 13 millimeter nut that's on the bottom of it, and it shouldn't be super tight. So just finger tight plus a little bit. So you should be able to just hold the gearbox in place and then use the 13 millimeter wrench to take it off. So you're gonna back off. You've got a nut, a locking ring, and then the gearbox itself. So this is something where chances are you're not gonna be able to just push the drive shaft out of the gearbox. You're gonna wanna give it a tap. You don't wanna mushroom the end of this. So there are a couple options here. You'll see the Baratza suggests just kind of using like the soft end of the screwdriver. If you happen to have like a brass tap, that works great. But you should be able to just give it a few good hard whacks and get it out. So once it does come apart, so you saw a few nuts, a few washers come out. I've got 4 in mine. These are gonna differ grinder to grinder sometimes. So we've got the kind of burr assembly and drive shaft and 4 washers that I'm gonna keep separate. Then within the gearbox itself, I have 2 additional washers. You can see all the coffee from this needing to be cleaned out. So I've got 2 washers that are on the gearbox side of it. And I'm gonna keep those separate from the 4 on the drive shaft side. You may have a different combination, whatever it is, keep it that way. So we've got everything taken apart now. This is the old Encore burr and drive shaft, and then this is the paddle wheel that's attached to it. So that's actually a part that will make your life a whole lot better to replace with this grinder. So this is something I replaced a little while ago, and what happens is these little fins wear down over time, and once that happens, you end up with even more grind retention than all the coffee that you see spread out here. So If you're getting more grinds retention than you think you should, and you're cleaning your grinder regularly and still having a problem with it, take a look and make sure that the fins are still in good shape on your paddle wheel, and it comes with a new little felt piece underneath. So I'm gonna put this straight onto the new Burr and drive shaft. So this threads reverse of what you think it normally would. So get that on, and then once it is on, the paddle wheel will just fit straight into the base of it. I'm going to hit this a little bit of compressed air, and the brush that Baratza sends when you first get your grinder actually works really well for getting some of the stubborn grounds off the bottom of it. I'm gonna stick that in there. You can see the difference in shape is pretty pronounced between the Virtuoso Burr and the Encore Burr, and overall it's one of those things that, again, mine is old and worn. It's one of those things that you can look at it and say, oh, they still look sharp, or feel them, or there's the fingernail test, but honestly none of that really is a great test of it. What you see in your grind consistency is what really matters. So I'm excited to try out the Virtuoso Burr in the Encore. So now the reassembly, remember we had 4 washers that came on the drive shaft, and stick those back in. I'm gonna clean out what is living inside this upper part. Give a few good taps. Use the brush and break up anything that might be stuck in there. This is easier to do with it all taken apart, for sure. And anytime you do take it apart for any kind of maintenance, it's a great time to give it a pretty good clean. And you don't necessarily have to have a big air compressor to be able to use compressed air in cleaning this out. Just a little like keyboard cleaner will go a really long way as well. And this grind chute can be a place where grounds get stuck, and they can be pretty stubborn. You definitely want to clean that out though. You don't want a buildup inside of there. So we've got the Burr, we've got the paddle wheel, the little felt ring, and we've got the 4 washers. This is going to go back into the upper assembly here. And then after that, we've got the 2 washers that came out of mine, and then the gear. So this gear can be a little bit stubborn, but you do want to get it all the way on there. You don't want there to be any vertical play in this. So once you've got that on pretty well, you're going to want to put the locking ring down on there, and then the nut itself. You're just going to want to get that finger tight, plus a little bit. So I think Baratza recommends somewhere between 1/8 and 1/4 of a turn. So I'm just going to use that 13 millimeter, again holding the gear in place, and give it about 1/8 of a turn. So you still want this to be able to turn freely, but you don't want any play in it. If you over tighten it, of course, you're running into a risk of creating too much friction. You don't want it to be loose enough to come loose accidentally. So again, finger tight. You shouldn't notice too much resistance change between going finger tight and about that 1/8 of a turn to 1/4 of a turn. So it should still spin freely. There shouldn't be any vertical play or side-to-side play. So that means that it's good, it's happy. Before I reassemble the rest of this, I'm going to use some compressed air to just clean out all the coffee grounds that built up in it. All right. There's a lot of coffee grounds retained in this. So once we have that done, we're going to reassemble the motor onto the gearbox. So this just goes back onto the motor. The end of the drive shaft should fit in this little brass bushing, and the whole thing should line back up. Then you've got the 4 screws. And when you're putting these back in, remember that you're just screwing a metal screw into plastic. So you want it to be in there snugly, but you don't want to overdo it. Otherwise, you're just going to end up tearing up the plastic. So I use a drill sometimes for disassembly, but definitely not for reassembly for that reason. Screw them back in. I've got to say, this is the reason that I love this grinder so much. Is that, I mean, you could go on the Baratza parts catalog and just build a grinder from scratch. Anything that you need to replace is there. They've been mindful enough to allow us to take the less expensive Encore and add the Burr out of the Virtuoso to it, so we can get a little bit better grind. All good things, right? So user serviceability is great. This is something where I don't have to worry about sending this grinder in to get a new burr set for it and then being without a grinder for days or weeks. And that was something that really that Baratza set out to do from the very beginning. They're very mindful of that because they know, like, their whole mission is to provide a great coffee grinder for us at home, and it's not a great grinder if you're without it for extended periods of time. So I ended up needing to grab a different screwdriver to get to this back one to tighten it really where I wanted it to be. Again, you don't want to over tighten this, but it's important that all 4 are kind of equally tightened, because you don't want any weird shear forces going on that drive shaft from the motor being offset. So if you did unplug this, it's easy enough. There's really only one way it can go back into the plug in the grinder. Baratza's been really great with that. So stick the motor back on, plugging the plug back in. And remember, we just had the 3, don't forget this grommet if it came off. There's one side of it that's shaped differently, and that goes towards the motor. All right, so we've got 1, 2, 3. Remember, I took the rear mount off. If you do that, all you have to do is just kind of slide it back into the plastic housing, and then we can reattach these. So there are 2 different screws here. You've got the long one that's got a little bit of Loctite on it. That goes into the other side mount. And then you've got the one that just looks like a screw itself, and that goes into the front one. So each of those 2 bolts on the side and the rear have the small nuts that go to them, but this front one just has the screw itself, because it's going straight into the chassis. Nice and easy on that one. These back 2, this is maybe one of the more frustrating parts, taking this part of the grinder apart and putting it back together, just in that the bolts, the nuts are shaped and placed in a way that it seems like the plastic around them should keep them from having any real slippage when you go to tighten them, but that's really not the case. You've got to hold them with your finger, and potentially even with some kind of pliers or a wrench. So I try to just hold it really tight with my finger. And again, like, this is something where we're just mounting this to the chassis. We're not doing anything that needs to be crazy tight. And the rubber mounts should keep too much vibration from happening. So again, with this one, same as the one in the back corner, you're just going to want to screw into it, especially if you try to do it blind. Just screw into it, and again, I'm just holding it with my finger back against the plastic frame. And that should be sufficient. So that's everything back together. We've got the switch on the front, we've got the switch on the back. You kind of have to dip the nose of it down ever so slightly to get it sit in here, which is a good thing, because we want it to sit under that collar. That's it. This is what it looks like back together inside. And then we take the body, put it back on, make sure it's lined up all the way around. Cool. That's back on. Good to go. I put the switch on now because otherwise I'll go to turn it back on and forget. The lower burr, remember I said we'd come back to this. Again, the brush that Baratza sends is really good at just getting some of these coffee grounds off of there and out of the burr without damaging it. It's also great to get out around the little O-ring that sits in there. But once you break all this up, compressed air, it makes the job a lot quicker and better. Great. Again, this only goes back in one way, this upper burr. So you can see Baratza is marked one side with red and the other part is white. And they've got little markings on the inside of here. If you try to put it in, I'll show you the wrong way. If you try to put it in the wrong way, so this is the wrong way with the red in the back. You can turn as if you're adjusting this ring and nothing happens. Nothing with the upper burr moves. That's not good. It means you can't adjust your grind. If you put it in the right way, which is the red pointing towards, there's a little slot right next to the red part there. If you do that, what happens is those three little fins, so these 1, 2, 3 fins, which are actually designed to save your grinder. If you get a rock or a screw or something in your coffee, you'll actually see the screw mechanism cover these up right away as you effectively adjust the grind. So that, if you see that happen, it means you've done it correctly. So you can actually see those go away. Remember your little grommet. This is something that usually I'll just wash in the sink and dry thoroughly. A dry rag does an okay job on it too. That goes back on. Hopper, you just line up the, if you have a newer one, you've got a white piece there. I painted mine white to be able to see the adjustment. You line it up with the arrow. Top goes on. Bin goes in, and we are done. So Encore is back together and ready to go give it a shot with the new burrs. So That, you know, it took less than a half hour while I was talking through it, and it's pretty straightforward. And if you get stuck, the Baratza customer service is really fantastic, and you know, it's a great chance to get to know your grinder better. It's not super intimidating. I mean, really, you can do the whole thing with, you know, a couple of screwdrivers and a wrench, and that's pretty much it. So don't be too intimidated with it. We're always here to try to help in any way that we can as well. And I'm excited to go play with the new Burr on this. Thanks, y'all.